Chapter 9 of the Moral Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Moral Pirates by Livingston Alden. Lifting the boat over the piles. The boat was in a shallow part of the river, between the shore and a long row of piles that marked the steamboat channel. Harry sounded with an oar, and found that the water was only 2 feet deep. "We'll have to get overboard and drag the boat over the piles," said he, "and it's going to be a mighty hard job, too. That swell threw us over as neat as the bull threw Joe over the fence up at Lenox last summer." "When I got pitched over that fence I stayed there," said Joe. "I didn't try to get back into the field where the bull was, and I don't see what we want to get back where the steamboats are for." "That's so!" exclaimed Harry. "We're safe enough here. Let's get the water out of the boat and keep on this side of the piles." When the boat was made dry, and the lighted lantern was hoisted to the top of the mast, Tom resumed his place at the helm, and Harry and Joe prepared to take another nap. "I don't want to grumble," said Joe, "but I wish I didn't have to lie on the coffee pot and a tin cup. I don't feel comfortable on that kind of bed." "I'll change with you if you like," replied Harry. "I'm sleeping on a beautiful soft bottle of oil and some sardine boxes, but I don't want to be selfish and keep the best bed for myself." "Oh, never mind," returned Joe. "I'll manage to sleep if Jim don't step on my face. I always did hate to have anybody step on my face when I was asleep." "Well, good night, everybody," said Harry. "I'm going straight to sleep. Tom, be sure to wake me up if a steamboat tries to climb over these piles." This time Tom did not fall asleep at the helm, but the wind gradually died away, and the sail hung limp and useless. Jim got out the oars without stepping on anybody, and rowed slowly on. In a little while they came to the end of the shallow lagoon into which the swell had so unexpectedly cast them. A sandbank stretched from the shore to the line of piles, and it was impossible to go any farther. Tom decided to make the boat fast to the limb of a willow tree that projected over the water, and to go ashore and sleep on the sand. Neither he nor Jim thought it worth while to wake the other boys, so they gathered up their blankets, crept quietly out of the boat, and were soon asleep on the soft, warm sand. When Harry and Joe awoke at daylight, stiff and cramped, they were disposed to be rather indignant at Tom and Jim, who were sleeping so comfortably on the sand. But Tom soon convinced them that he had acted from the best of motives, and they readily forgave him. Of course, breakfast was the first business of the day, and after that was finished, the boat had to be entirely unloaded before she could be lifted over the piles into the channel. For the first time since they had started on the cruise, the breeze was ahead, but it was so light that it was of very little consequence. The sky was cloudy, and the day promised to be a cool one, so the boys resolved to take to their oars and try, if possible, to reach Albany before night. When the boat was loaded, Tom and Jim each took a long oar, and Harry took his usual seat in the stern sheets. They all felt fresh, in spite of their night's adventure, and started gaily on their intended long day's row. By this time they had found out that, although round tin boxes were very well to keep things dry, they are by no means handy to carry in a boat. Their shape made it impossible to stow them compactly. Joe, who sat at the bow, always had to pick his way over these tin boxes in going to or coming from his station, and he was constantly catching his foot in the spaces left between the boxes and falling down on them. This smashed in the covers and tried Joe's temper sorely. Once he sat down so violently on the box which held the sugar that he went completely through the cover and was fastened in the box as securely as a cork in a bottle. He was only released after a great deal of work, and just in time to enable the boys to have sugar in their coffee at night. Harry resolved that he would never cruise again with round boxes, but would have small rubber bags made in which to put everything that required to be kept dry. The boys took turns at the oars every hour, and rowed steadily until noon. They gave themselves an hour for lunch and resting, and then resumed their work. Late in the afternoon they came in sight of Albany, and went ashore, so as to get their dinner before reaching the city. After dinner they again pulled away at the oars, and at about 9 o'clock they stopped at a lumber yard on the outskirts of Albany, and, creeping in among the lumber, wrapped their blankets around them and dropped to sleep, completely worn out but proud of their long day's row. Before sunrise the next morning, Tom was awakened by a stick which was thrust into his ribs. Without opening his eyes, he muttered, "You quit that, or I'll get up and pound you," and immediately dropped to sleep again. Somebody then kicked him so sharply that he roused himself up, and, opening his eyes, was dazzled by the gleam of a bull's-eye lantern. He could not, at first, imagine where he was, but, as he presently found that a big policeman had him by the collar, and was calling him an impudent young thief, he began to imagine that something was wrong. "I've got you this time," said the policeman, "and the whole gang of you. Where did you steal that property on your boat from, you precious young river pirate?" "We're not river pirates," replied Tom. "We're moral pirates, and we brought these things in the boat with us from New York." "Well, I like your cheek," said the officer, "owning up to that you're pirates. Now, just you and your gang take everything out of that boat, and let me see what you've got. If any of you try to escape, I'll put a bullet into you. You hear me?" The other boys had been awakened by the loud voice of the policeman, and were staring at him in utter astonishment. "He thinks we're river thieves," said Tom. "Harry, we'll have to show him what we've got in the boat, and then he'll see his mistake." Harry eagerly assured the policeman that they had come from New York on a pleasure cruise, and had nothing in the boat except provisions and stores. "That's a pretty story," said the officer. "You can tell that to the court. Your boat's full of junk that you've stolen from somewhere, and you'd better hand it out mighty quick." The boys were thus compelled to unload their boat, while the policeman stood over them, with his club in one hand and his lantern in the other. He was not a stupid man, and he soon perceived that the boys had told him the truth. They were not the gang of river thieves for whom he had mistaken them. He therefore apologized, in a rough way, and even helped the boys repack the boat. "What I can't understand," said he, "is why you boys come here and sleep in a lumber yard when you might be sleeping at home in your beds. Now, if you were thieves, you couldn't get any better lodgings, you know, but you're gentlemen's sons. You ought to know better. Why don't you go down to the hotel and live like gentlemen? Where's the fun in being arrested and taking up my valuable time?" The boys assured him that they had never enjoyed themselves more than they had while on the cruise, and after a little more talk the officer turned slowly away. "By the by," he exclaimed, suddenly turning back again, "one of you told me you were pirates. I ought to take you in after all. I believe you're a lot of boys that have been reading dime novels and have run away from home." "I didn't say we were pirates," replied Tom. "I said we were moral pirates. That's a very different thing." "Of course it is," said Joe. "A moral pirate is a sort of missionary, you know. I'm afraid you don't go to Sunday school, officer, or you'd know better." The policeman could not quite make up his mind whether Joe was in joke or in earnest, but, as he could find no real reason for arresting the boys, he contented himself with telling them to leave the lumber yard as soon as the sun rose. "And you'd better look out," he added, "that you don't come across any real river thieves. They'll make no bones of seizing your boat and knocking you on the head if you make any noise." When he was fairly out of sight the boys crept back to their shelter among the lumber, and coolly went to sleep again. They were so tired that neither policemen nor river thieves had any terrors for them. End of Chapter 9. Read by Nancy Cochran Gergen, Gilbert, Arizona, January 6, 2023.